Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this afternoon's update on Hurricane Lee. So, Hurricane Lee is currently explosively intensifying in the west central Atlantic Ocean, and as of 5 p.m. Atlantic Standard Time, Thursday, September the 7th, Hurricane Lee has maximum sustained winds of 130 miles per hour, a minimum central pressure of 953 millibars, and west northwesterly movement at 15 miles per hour. And then we have newly formed Tropical Storm Margaret just west of the Cape Verde Islands, with maximum sustained winds of 40 miles per hour, a minimum central pressure of 1,004 millibars, and west northwesterly movement at 17 miles per hour. Looking at the latest official National Hurricane Center's cone for Hurricane Lee, Lee is now expected to remain a major hurricane for at least the next 5 days through Tuesday afternoon, passing about 300 to 400 miles to the northeast of the Lesser Antilles, Virgin Islands, Puerto Rico, and Hispaniola. So looking at the latest interactive cone and satellite imagery for Hurricane Lee from Zoom Earth, Hurricane Lee now looks like a classic Category 4 major hurricane on satellite, with we see the cirrus clouds fanning out on the northern and northeastern side down to the southeastern side of Hurricane Lee, showing perfect ventilation for the storm. We have the perfect spiral pinwheel shape now to Hurricane Lee, and then zooming in, we can see that we have an eye, we have a perfect looking eye with Hurricane Lee now, and a solid eye wall surrounding the eye. So Lee is looking very impressive on visible satellite. It is looking like a classic textbook major hurricane. So looking at the interactive cone, by overnight tonight, Friday 1 a.m. Central Time, Lee is expected to become a 160 mile per hour Category 5 major hurricane, and then by Friday 1 p.m. Central Time, 165 mile per hour Category 5 major hurricane, now predicted by the National Hurricane Center, moving to the west-northwest. Saturday 1 a.m., 160 mile per hour Category 5 major hurricane moving to the northwest. Saturday 1 p.m. Central Time, 155 mile per hour Category 4 major hurricane now forecast. Sunday 1 a.m. Central Time, 155 mile per hour Category 4 major hurricane moving to the northwest. Sunday 1 p.m. Central Time, 150 mile per hour Category 4 major hurricane, passing about 350 to 400 miles north of Anguilla, and then by Monday 1 p.m. Central Time, 150 mile per hour Category 4 major hurricane, about 450 miles to the northeast of Puerto Rico, and then by Tuesday afternoon, a 140 mile per hour Category 4 major hurricane, about 500 miles to the northeast of the Dominican Republic. So, thankfully, Hurricane Lee continues to slightly shift to the north, and even though Hurricane Lee is going to be an incredibly powerful hurricane, the majority of the impacts are going to be missing the Lesser Antilles, Antigua, Barbuda, Anguilla, the Virgin Islands, Puerto Rico, and Hispaniola well to the north. However, beyond the 5-day period, we're going to have to watch closely for what Lee does in areas like the Turks and Caicos, Bahamas, and especially Bermuda. So looking at the latest spaghetti mall plots for Hurricane Lee, in the next 48 to 72 to 96 to 120 hours, Lee is expected to pass safely to the north of the northern Lesser Antilles, Virgin Islands, Puerto Rico, and Hispaniola, and curve to the north now, well to the east of the Turks and Caicos, in about 144 hours to 168 hours, or 6 to 7 days. But as I mentioned before, if you're in Bermuda, make sure you're watching these model trends very closely. And looking at the intensity model guidance for Hurricane Lee, this is something I have not seen in my time forecasting weather here on YouTube. Hurricane Lee is expected to maintain Category 4 hurricane status through at least the next 6 to 7 days, as nearly all of the models, in fact, I think all of the models get Lee to a Category 4 at some point in its lifetime, and then we have about 40% of the models taking Lee to a Category 5 hurricane, with some of these models taking it as high as 160 knots, which would be a 180 mile per hour monster. Hurricane Lee could break some records for how intense it gets over the next 24 to 36 hours. So looking at the latest GEFS ensemble plots for Hurricane Lee, the GFS ensembles are keeping Lee safely to the north of the Caribbean islands. However, we do have some members getting kind of close to the Bahamas and Turks and Caicos. So this is a trend I'm going to really watch over the next several days. And then, unfortunately, many of the GFS members are getting Lee very close, and we have several members taking Lee over Bermuda in about 7 to 8 days. So Bermuda, you really need to be watching Hurricane Lee. And this goes same for the European ensemble tracks. European ensemble models keep Lee safely to the north of the Lesser Antilles, Virgin Islands, Puerto Rico, Hispaniola. Most keep it to the northeast of the Bahamas and Turks and Caicos, although we do have some of these models getting dangerously close to the Turks and Caicos in about 5 to 6 days. So live in the Turks and Caicos, southeastern Bahamas. Make sure you're watching Lee very closely, as we could see some trends to the west. And then once again, Bermuda, make sure you're really watching Lee as you're in the middle of many of these ensemble member paths. And then as we go into the next about 9 to 10 days, we do have some of these models taking Lee close to the Cape Cod area, and then off screen in about 10 to 12 days, these models take Lee up to Atlantic Canada. So New England, Atlantic Canada, make sure you're watching Lee over the next several days as well. And then I'm just going to show you this incredible satellite loop of Hurricane Lee over the last 24 hours. Lee went from looking like a disorganized hurricane to a perfect looking major hurricane in the matter of about 12 hours. I mean, this was what Lee looked like this morning. Looked like a raggedy disorganized hurricane, and now this is what it looks like at 4:30 p.m. Central Time this afternoon. A perfect looking major hurricane with a perfect eye and a perfect eye wall. So looking at the latest tropical storm force wind probabilities from the National Hurricane Center, about a 20% chance of seeing tropical storm force winds in the northern British Virgin Islands, as well as Antigua and Barbuda, and about a 10% chance in St. Kitts and Nevis, St. Martin, St. Martin, Montserrat, and then the central British Virgin Islands down towards the U.S. Virgin Islands, northeast Puerto Rico. So thankfully, these tropical storm force wind probabilities continue to gradually decrease. And before I close the video, I'm going to be reading you the key messages for Hurricane Lee. Lee is forecast to become a major hurricane later today, with its core moving north of the northern Leeward Islands, the Virgin Islands, and Puerto Rico this weekend and early next week. The potential for tropical storm conditions to occur in the islands is decreasing, but residents there should continue to monitor updates on Lee. Swells generated by Lee are expected to reach portions of the Lesser Antilles on Friday, and the British and U.S. Virgin Islands, Puerto Rico, Hispaniola, the Bahamas, and Bermuda this weekend. These swells are likely to cause life-threatening surf and rip current conditions. So another thing I haven't really mentioned that much is going to be the surf and the rip currents. So even if you do live in the Lesser Antilles, the Virgin Islands, Puerto Rico, Hispaniola, Bahamas, Turks and Caicos, and Bermuda, make sure you're staying out of the water, as there's going to be some dangerous rip currents from Hurricane Lee. So thanks for watching this afternoon's update on Lee. So make sure you're paying attention to Lee if you live in the Turks and Caicos, Bahamas, Bermuda, and down the line, the Northeast, New England, and Atlantic Canada. I'll continue to provide updates on Hurricane Lee as the days progress. Thanks for watching. Please stay safe and have a wonderful afternoon, my friends.